Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 1218 of the Juicebox Podcast. Donald has type 1 diabetes. He's a software engineer, and he is a person who embraces new technology. So today we're going to talk to him about looping, different things that you can do for your diabetes, and something called Vision AI. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan. When you place your first order for AG1 with my link, you'll get 5 free travel packs and a free year supply of vitamin D. Drink ag1.com/juicebox. U.S. residents who have type 1 diabetes or are the caregivers of someone with type 1, T1D Exchange is looking for you. Go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox, complete the survey, and you will be helping with type 1 diabetes research. All you have to do is complete that survey. Your answers to easy questions, stuff that you already know, will help to move type 1 diabetes research forward. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. If you're looking for community around type 1 diabetes, check out the Juicebox Podcast private Facebook group. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Touched by Type 1. Find them at touchedbytype1.org on Instagram and Facebook, and in person sometimes. As a matter of fact, I just committed to their next in-person event. Find out more at touchedbytype1.org. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Eversense CGM. An implantable 6-month sensor is what you get with Eversense, but you get so much more. Exceptional and consistent accuracy over 6 months, and distinct on-body vibe alerts when you're high or low. On-body vibe alerts? You don't even know what that means, do you? EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. Go find out. Today's episode is sponsored by Medtronic Diabetes, a company that's bringing together people who are redefining what it means to live with diabetes. Later in this episode, I'll be speaking with Mark. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 28. He's 47 now, and you're going to learn a little bit about him in just a moment. To hear more stories from the Medtronic Champion community or to share your own story, visit medtronicdiabetes.com/juicebox and check out the Medtronic Champion hashtag on social media.
Hey, I'm Donald. I've been a longtime software engineer, programmer, technology enthusiast. Was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes a little less than 10 years ago. Started fully looping and, really getting into all the tech and the open source and all of that good stuff a few years after being diagnosed. So I've definitely gotten familiar with all of that. Also a listener to the pod. So I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. I appreciate you listening. 10 years ago, how old were you?
Oh, man, the math. I was about 18.
You're 28 now?
Yeah.
It's not a lot of math.
That's fair.
So at 18 years old, you were diagnosed. You're 28 now. Is there any type 1 in your family tree?
No, that's the weird thing. Closest we had was type 2 grandma, but no type 1.
Okay. How about other autoimmune for you?
Other autoimmune?
Yeah.
No, nothing really out of the ordinary.
Okay. Celiac, thyroid, anything like that in the family?
None of it.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's odd.
Were you sick before your diagnosis? Did you have any kind of virus, Coxsackie virus, anything like that?
I don't think it was anything specific. It was the first year that I was in college, and just like, the first few years, or I guess first few months that you're in a college dorm and just, around a bunch of guys, and, the hygiene's definitely not kept up from the others. I feel like I was pretty solid, at least. Yeah, I think just getting sick a lot from that and the flu, just stress, being away from home, caught up. And I think that's what did it.
You were ill a number of times in college?
Yeah, just, like flu, colds, and things like that.
Was that uncommon for you?
It was more frequent. I don't think it was anything that hadn't happened before, but it was definitely more than it had happened, before that.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's talk about so you said you're doing, what are you, looping now?
I am looping
Okay.
enthusiastically.
Enthusiastically looping could actually be your episode title.
Oh, good one.
But that's not how it started, obviously. So when you were diagnosed, what did they give you? How long did you do it for?
Yes. So when I was diagnosed, it was actually when I remember like so clearly, I was on winter break and I was, hanging out with my parents. We're eating some good Chinese food. And my mom noticed I was drinking just a ton of water. So eventually that got me over to the hospital. It was my family doctor I'd seen my whole life. He was actually pretty with it and gave me like a really good overview of things. Like, I feel like if you have to tell someone like, hey, here's this whole life disease you're gonna have to deal with your whole life, I'm only gonna be able to talk to you about it for a few days. So here's a crash course.
Mm-hmm.
So he did a good job with that. I was started off on, the manual injection pens, pricking my finger. I think it was Novolog. I did that for, even a few years after I got to college and got another endo who was really awesome. She, is like, hey, you're a tech guy. You can upgrade to a continuous glucose monitor, an insulin pump. But I was still a little in denial. I was like, oh my gosh, this thing's always going to be on me. That makes it permanent. What if somebody sees it? I'm in college, so I need to, try to feel cool and everything.
Yeah.
But ended up getting all the tech and, everybody else thought it was cool too. So it was a huge quality of life improvement.
Donald, what were your friends into that they thought your insulin pump was cool?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I felt good about it.
I feel like you're telling me that everybody at the D&D game liked your insulin pump.
Oh man, you just called me out.
Did I get close?
Oh, actually, I was on like both sides of the spectrum. I was president for our hacking club at my university, and then also in a fraternity.
No kidding.
So I got to unite the both, and it was pretty accepted in both spots.
How about that? Good for you. The hacking club. What did that consist of?
It consisted of, a couple late nights, some pizza, and making some really cool projects. Yeah, we actually had a hackers club, and usually, when most people hear hacking, you think of some guy wearing a hoodie and, he's trying to break into the government's computers or something. How we use the word hacking is for building. So, one example is, we might hack together a app that lets you connect to your window blinds so that, at certain times of the day, you can have that automatically open your blinds and close them. And, just whatever cool projects we felt like making. Actually, one of my early ones was a really basic way to track the last finger I had pricked. So, it's kind of like, okay, need to cycle through them evenly. And it was a fun way to, make that kind of stuff easier.
So it just kind of kept track of your finger pricks?
Yeah. Like, I think I also used it for my dosage calculator because I didn't like any of the ones that were out there that I had found at that point.
Interesting.
So I think it knew, you had just entered your, you just pricked your finger to get your glucose and use that to bolus or something. So I'll rotate, the next finger you need to go to.
Interesting. That's really something. Have you made other things for yourself that you want to use personally since then? Or is your work been mostly, related to your job?
That was towards the end of, I did do there was a competition. Competition is probably not the right word. There was a open kind of like bounty where someone said, hey, we know sometimes some of the diabetes sharing servers from popular apps can go down. So, we'll pay someone $500 if they can send a notification whenever, I think it was like the Dexcom Clarity sharing servers went down. So I put in a submission for that. I think someone else beat out mine though. They got it in earlier. But yeah, I remember putting that together.
Donald's then, it's not that mine didn't work. It just, his got there first. That's all.
yeah. Mine was like, kind of cool, but I guess his is really cool.
It's interesting. It really is. So growing up with type 1 really happened right in college for you.
It did.
Yeah. And so your parents probably weren't involved, or were they?
No, they were not. They were like very hands off. I remember the start that I had going back to my doctor was he'd written all my formulas on a little index card, explained what sliding scale was, and he's like, my parents are like, well, you're better at math than we are at this point, so we're gonna let you roll with it, and it worked out pretty good.
Nice. Did you have any odd feelings about that? Like just going off to college with this whole new thing, or did it feel very doable to you? Right now, we're going to hear from a member of the Medtronic Champion community. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Medtronic Diabetes. And this is Mark.
I used injections for about 6 months, and then my endocrinologist in the Navy recommended a pump.
How long had you been in the Navy?
8 years up to that point.
I've interviewed a number of people who have been diagnosed during service, and most of the time they're discharged. What happened to you?
I was medically discharged. 6 months after my diagnosis.
Was it your goal to stay in the Navy for your whole life, your career?
It was. Yeah. In fact, I think a few months before my diagnosis, my wife and I had that discussion about, staying in for the long term. And, we'd made the decision despite all the hardships and time away from home. That was what we loved the most.
Was the Navy a lifetime goal of yours?
Lifetime goal. As my earliest childhood memories were flying, being a fighter pilot.
How did your diagnosis impact your lifelong dream?
It was devastating. Everything I had done in life, everything I'd worked up to that point was just taken away in an instant. I was not prepared for that at all.
What does your support system look like?
Friends, your family, caregivers, for me, the Medtronic Champions community, all those resources that are out there help guide the way, but then help keep abreast on, the new things that are coming down the pipe, and to give you hope for eventually that we can find a cure.
And you can hear more stories from Medtronic Champions and share your own story at medtronicdiabetes.com/juicebox. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the only 6-month wear implantable CGM on the market. And it's very unique. So you go into an office. I've actually seen an insertion done online, like a live one, they recorded it. The entire video is less than 8 minutes long, and they're talking most of the time. The insertion took no time at all, right? So you go into the office, they insert the sensor. Now it's in there and working for 6 months. You go back 6 months later, they pop out that one, put in another one. So 2 office visits a year to get really accurate and consistent CGM data. That's neither here nor there for what I'm trying to say. So this thing's under your skin, right? And you then wear a transmitter over top of it. Transmitter's got this nice, gentle silicone adhesive that you change daily. So very little chance of having skin irritations. That's a plus. So you put the transmitter on, it talks to your phone app, tells you your blood sugar, your alerts, your alarms, etc. But if you want to be discreet for some reason, you take the transmitter off, just swoop, comes right off. No, not like peeling at it or having to rub off adhesive. It just kind of pops right off. This silicone stuff, really cool. You'll say it. And now you're ready for your big day, whatever that day is. It could be a prom or a wedding or just a moment when you don't want something hanging on your arm. The Eversense CGM allows you to do that without wasting a sensor, because you just take the transmitter off, and then when you're ready to use it again, you pop it back on. Maybe you just want to take a shower without rocking a sensor with a bar of soap. Just remove the transmitter and put it back on when you're ready. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. You really should check it out.
I think I did really luck out from, some people have probably already heard of the honeymoon phase, where you're still getting your pancreas is still putting in some work, but you need to kind of help it out with some insulin in the back. So I remember going to the dorm rooms and being able to just crush, a ton of cookies. And I was like, yeah, this seems like the right amount of insulin. And it matched up pretty well. I was like, oh, this diabetes thing's pretty easy.
You think you were honeymooning maybe?
Yeah, I was definitely honeymooning.
Yeah.
And so then after I came down from that, it was, I need to be careful whenever, we go out for some drinks, because then I learned, your liver can't put out glucagon to bring your blood sugar back up. So, I had to learn the hard way from some scary episodes. Never ended up in the hospital, fortunately. But, I can't say that was up to, that was from my own skill or anything.
Yeah. Can you give me an example of a scary episode?
Yeah. It was just like a typical night out, and we were on our way back, and I was not really all the way with it, probably more from the drinks than anything.
Mm-hmm.
I had already gave, all of my fraternity buddies a good lowdown of, hey, if I ever need anything, here's how you can prick my finger. Here's glucagon, here's some Gatorades I keep under my bed. Here's the signs of hypoglycemia and everything. I let them know, and I got back, and I think it had dipped down to like 38, and they were, helping me take down some Gatorades and everything. But
just you and a bunch of drunk 18-year-olds taking care of your 38 blood sugar.
I'm sure from like an outside perspective, it was a beautiful thing at the moment. But it was definitely scary.
Well, seriously, letting other people know about your situation was huge for you, probably right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's like, if I wasn't doing all the other right things, I guess that was one of them.
No, for sure. Well, let me ask you this. What were your A1Cs like in the first couple of years?
Oh, geez. I think the first one when I came in after being diagnosed was 10 or 11 or something pretty high up like that. And then I think my average glucose, I might have lucked out with keeping it under 200 in the honeymoon phase, but it was probably averaging out to like, 190 through 250 back, like, if it really wasn't going well.
Yeah.
I think once I had figured things out a bit more back then, probably 180 was like, doing good.
Okay. How long do you think it took you to get to that level?
Oh man, a couple of years.
Yeah. And what about those years? Were they maturing years, or were they experience with diabetes until you understood it years? Maybe a blend.
Oh man. Yeah. It probably was a blend, going back to feeling a little bit of denial and overconfidence from the honeymoon phase. Didn't think it needed a ton of mental effort or just, much thinking from my end. So I think after I kind of got through that and just matured up and was like, okay, this is something that takes effort. This is something that's really important. That's when things got a little better.
Okay. Can you tell me what made you feel like it was important to understand? Do you remember like an aha moment, or like what made you think this isn't good enough, I need to do better?
I think part of it, there's actually a programmer who's a type 1 diabetic from Microsoft, and I'm just really releasing my inner nerd here. I think it's Scott Hanselman on Twitter, and he's a really awesome influence for that stuff. And I remember seeing him, some really good, consistent glucose numbers. I think he keeps it, like pretty consistently around 90 or something, or he'd shown some like other graphs. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I know my endo had said one thing, but I can see someone else actually hitting that. I probably need to do that. So I think that influence made a big difference.
Someone you had respect for and knew about was having outcomes that you saw as hopeful, and you thought, if they can do that, I could probably do that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. That's great. I know Scott's name, by the way. I don't know if I've ever met him, but it's interesting that you said somebody. I was like, oh, I know that name. It's crazy.
Oh.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he's
crazy.
great. Not that I know him personally either, but by now it kind of feels like it.
Isn't that something? He's been at it a long time, hasn't he, on Twitter?
Yeah. I mean, even with the diabetes scene, I remember seeing him post about, it was like a newspaper clipping from the 90s or the 80s when he was in college. And he was doing a little bit of hacking on his PDM to, get it to do some more cool stuff.
It's amazing. So you're using what at that point? You're pumping, and what pump was it?
Oh, I was, bravery for me at that point was upgrading to the continuous glucose monitor.
So you're MDI with a CGM?
Yep, manual injections with the G6,
okay,
G5, G6, whatever it was back then. But it wasn't until I got out of college that I actually began looping, saw Omnipod, didn't have tubing, which was a big win for me. And I think by this point, I had heard about the looping scene, and I just saw that I could, maybe it was just the app interface or something, but I was like, oh, I'm not even going to bother with the, like the factory app. I'm just going to use this like open source one. So I think
you went right from MDI to looping.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, also it shows that you weren't, I imagine, put off by the technical aspects of setting up Loop. That probably seemed obvious and easy to you, I would imagine.
Oh man, that's a funny thing. I mean, my full-time job is setting up technical projects like that. You have to download all the stuff, you have to get it set up and then, put it on your phone.
Mm-hmm.
But it was still a challenge. There's such a good community that it gets past all of those technical issues, which is super incredible. Just all the Looped Facebook groups and everything else that's out there. All those people are, making a big difference.
Right. No, for sure.
That was actually part of why I ended up going from those manual setup steps to the T1 PAL service where they just do it for you.
Okay. Hold on a second, Don. This is strange. I don't usually record this late at night, but my chameleon's getting automatically misted. So let's hold on a second while that happens.
That's awesome. Your chameleon?
Yeah, I have a chameleon behind me in my office, and his tank gets doused right before his lights go out, and it's on a timer. So I didn't. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Let's wait for that.
I had to change my insulin pump. It was. I usually always do it at night, but I just got back from a trip and I had to do it at a weird time. So I had to change my pump like right before. Otherwise, it would have went off.
Yeah. So he likes to sleep with more humidity. So for about a minute before the lights go out, the tank gets misted very heavily, gives him one last chance to, get a drop of water if he wants, helps the plants grow, etc. It also helps when later tonight, I can't believe I'm saying this. You thought you sounded like a dork. Hold on a second.
No, let's hear it.
Wait till later tonight when a fogger that I made myself will come on and bring up his humidity to like 100% for about 6 hours overnight, because he actually hydrates through breathing the air. So he doesn't really drink like you would imagine an animal drinking out of like a basin of something like that. So he gets all of his hydration through humidity overnight.
That's awesome.
But no humidifier that you can buy can handle that or holds enough water. So what I have here is a 10-gallon dog food container. So it's opaque so that the sun can't get in. So we don't have any problem with, the water getting funky. Then there are 2 holes drilled in the top of it. One is for a low-speed fan, and one is for a 3-inch tube that goes right up into the bottom of the enclosure. So then there's, Jesus, I do sound like an idiot. Hold on a second.
Yeah, this is cool.
So
I'm into it.
Inside the water is a UV bulb that keeps algae from growing. And there is also a bubbler. So like if you ever saw a pond that has like fog going across the top of it, so that comes on a timer. It starts to make fog inside of the container. And then
is that just air pushing through?
It's actually electric the way it does it. It's crazy. It vibrates and heats and it makes it into fog. It's really interesting.
Whoa, that is so cool.
I want to let people know I got that disc from thehouseofhydro.com. The guy's fantastic if you have any needs. And then the fan comes on, pressurizes the tank, and then the fog escapes through the tube and fills the enclosure.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Anyway,
I want to make one now just to have a fogger on demand.
Oddly proud of it.
You would have belonged well in our hacker club.
Yeah, I would have done okay. So because they, when you set these up, I must have bought 4 different humidifiers and returned them.
Wow.
Every time I got one, I was like, this won't do it. It's not set up correctly. It doesn't hold enough, like blah, blah, blah. It needed to be cleaned too often. There were all kinds of different problems. And one day I just sat down. I was like, I'm just going to make one. Then after I did it, of course, I found somebody online who's like, you should just make one yourself. And I was like, where was this information while I was beating my head? I felt like I reinvented the wheel. And apparently I was like 3 years late. But anyway.
I love it. No, that's a cool project.
Yeah. So, okay, Donald. So when we're done, I'll send you a picture of Durban, which is my chameleon's name.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so what I like here is that you go to move to Loop. And even with your extensive background, which I'm going to ask you about in a second, it still was daunting enough that you reached out and said, I need to get somebody else to do this for me.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Nowadays, can you do it yourself, or are you still paying someone to do it for you?
Well, and I'd even say I did it for myself for a while. I think it was when Heroku had their plan change where you'd have to upgrade from the free
$7 a month now or something like that, right? Yeah.
And I was working at Salesforce at the time, who owned Heroku, so I was hearing about some of those comms. All well received stuff too, which was good to see and fun to see, like who was in the looping community inside of Salesforce. Yeah, I was able to set it up. It was just real pain. When the upgrade happened, I was like, okay, I can do all this stuff, but I just don't want to spend my time doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when there was some messaging out from, I can't remember where, but they mentioned T1 Pal is the service that can just set it up for you. So I was like, yeah, that'd be great. I'd pay someone to do that.
I actually have a guest on the show who works there. If you ever go find Type 2 Stories, John. I think John works there. Yeah. John.
I guess to add on to the history, when I onboarded, I had met Ben West.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh my gosh, you helped make Night Scout. That is ultra cool.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, I actually did a little bit of work with them to just kind of help out on a few things. And, I tied it up at that just to keep working on some other projects. It was a really awesome way to hang out with all of those guys. They're just
nice,
super brilliant. And, it was fun to work with them for a little bit.
Yeah, I hear that. Okay, so you're using Loop and you're going along. Does your diabetes get easier to manage? Does your A1C come down? Does your time and range get better? What do you learn from being automated like that?
It was really cool. It was my fiance who actually noticed the major change was that I wasn't going low at night anymore. I'm hard to think back to what was really causing it. I'm sure I was still just trying to figure things out. Just having that basal be able to change at night and take care of you when you're sleeping.
Yeah. Donald, listen, if all an algorithm did was let you sleep better, I'd think it was amazing.
Yeah.
The rest of it's a bonus in my eyes. So that's amazing. So, okay. So you have fewer lows overnight. It's a good experience for you. Now, this is a little like a weird minefield for me to walk through here. So I'm going to try to give a little bit of background. You're going to fill in some gaps that I don't understand. And then we're going to talk about something completely different than what we've been talking about before.
Okay.
Now, what I have to say is that oddly, I find myself in a situation where I have a financial stake in Vision AI. And I've never had anything on the show before where I have a connection like that. So I don't really know the right way to handle it other than to just say out in front that this is true. Now, having said that, I have made no money from it whatsoever. And it would probably only benefit me if the company were to get very popular or get sold or something like that. So let me give you some backstory and then you can fill me in on the things I don't understand.
Okay.
A man named Justin came to me one day and started telling me about his company, Vision AI, and how he wants to use AI to basically give people like a doctor in their pocket. And he said that he wanted to have very good information about diabetes there. And he asked me about integrating the actual podcast into what his AI understands. And I thought, well, this is very weird and interesting. But also, Donald, what I thought was, I've already been working on this for like a year and a half. So behind the scenes, I had been picking through everything I could, keeping in mind I'm not a programmer and I don't understand AI at all. All I had going for me was a podcast episode I listened to on a long ride where this guy got on and described how AI worked and how he saw it working in the world. And all I could think while he was talking was, oh my God, it trains itself on the knowledge that's available online. And therefore it has answers based on all this data. And I kept thinking, what if it only trained itself on something specific? Like, wouldn't that be amazing? And isn't my podcast very likely the largest repository of diabetes conversations that's ever existed?
Yeah.
Is there a way for me to get my audio transcribed? And I was actually getting it accomplished. It was expensive and I couldn't really do it the way I wanted to, but I was doing it. I started with the Pro Tip series and some stuff like that. And I'm telling you, Donald, this is probably of no surprise to you whatsoever, but I could ask an episode of the Pro Tip series, an incredibly specific question about diabetes. And the answer that came back was not only insanely accurate, but it felt like I was talking to myself.
Isn't it incredible?
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy.
I would think I wrote this. As a matter of fact, the last speaking gig I did, I asked it to go through the Pro Tip series and break it down into categories and give me talking points.
Love it.
And when it gave them to me, I looked at them and thought, this is exactly what I would say about this if I were to stand up in front. I was like, this is amazing. So anyway, I was working towards it. But when Justin's like, hey, we kind of already did that, I was like, well, that's better than me doing it, because I don't think I could have afforded it, because there would have been a lot of back end cost for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have been a nice value add for the listeners, but I couldn't have asked them to pay me for it. Like, you know what I mean? So I was like, how am I going to do this? It's going to break me. They're going to get value and I'm going to go broke trying to keep it going for them. So anyway, Justin comes along and says that he has this opportunity. Would I be interested? And I said, absolutely. He asked me to be an advisor for the company, which is a thing I did. And again, full, disclosure, I guess if somebody comes along and buys Justin's company for money, I'll get a very, very tiny piece of it. So I want people to know that. But here's the thing. I'm starting to understand that you're the reason Justin knows who I am. Is that right?
It is, through a funny turn of fate.
Well, thank you. I owe you nothing, Donald. I want to say that up front. Tell me, you cannot have a piece of my nothing. Okay. but tell me how this all happens, please.
Yeah. I mean, well, being here is, I think that's pretty good. Probably the best payoff at all. So, oh man. Yeah. I'm trying to piece that together myself. Back to me using T1 Pal. One day I had gotten an email saying that, hey, there's a new service that is integrated once T1 Pal comes out of the box. You click a few buttons and sign up and, pay their fee and it's on. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, let's take a look into this. And I open up the website. I'm like, oh, this actually looks pretty impressive. I sign up and get a call to kind of get integrated and answer any questions I had. So funny enough, just how I had met Ben and John and the folks at T1 Pal is how I met Justin when I was just getting set up for the product. And after that, I had spoke with Justin for a bit. I can talk about this maybe a little bit more after, but I was super excited about it. I mean, I had thought about this kind of product for years before we had the breakthrough of AI models that we have now. And so when I saw someone doing it, I was like, all right, let's see if this is the person or this is the company that's going to do it. But I'm at least going to feel out the waters and see what's going on. Had a lot of great conversations and eventually mentioned, hey, have you listened to the Juicebox podcast? It's the best place for advanced advice. There's really no one else is doing it. A lot of people cover the fundamentals, but when you're 10 years into it and you're really trying to get your A1C down and deal with all the variables of life, like no one else covers it better than Scott and his crew.
Oh, thank
and
you.
That's
so
what brought
nice.
it around.
So nice. I appreciate that very much. Justin said something to me, and tell me if he was just being kind. He said that you said, or somebody said, it would be cool if I asked it a question and Scott's knowledge came out of it. Did you say that?
Verbatim.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow, that's so nice. Thank you. You saved me a lot of hassle. I appreciate that very much because I was slaving away behind the scenes trying to make this thing work because I saw the value in it. I mean, if people don't understand how AI works, I think I did a fine enough job talking about it a second ago, but all I could keep imagining was what if you just trained it on a finite amount of information? But I never imagined that it would actually cull from conversation. And where it really threw me for a loop is there's an episode where Jenny and I do the math of setting up stuff, the math of basal insulin, the math of insulin to carb ratio, that kind of stuff. And we never actually straight through step by step describe the process for coming up with, say, your insulin sensitivity factor.
Mm-hmm.
But you can ask the episode how to do it, and it tells you. And it's if you say to it, I weigh this, I'm an adult, I'm of a average activity level, it will tell you your insulin sensitivity is about here to here. And I'm like, these are the kind of things that people struggle with forever and never get the straight answer to. Imagine you get a range. You start at the low part, the safest part, and you work your way up, and you at least you have like a dial in idea. Like, I can turn this knob about this far and try it on my own. Man, I'll tell you, that's when I was like, I'm like, oh my God, it picked that out of a conversation. Like it really it flipped my mind a little bit that it could do that. And it made me very excited, just like you were describing before.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then you're a user, you become a user. And how long ago was that?
Oh man, not long. I'd say a few months.
How are you enjoying it? What do you find yourself using it for?
It's incredible. I mean, I'd say for what I enjoy about it, it's probably good to mention what I expected, what I would kind of expect a copycat to look like. So what I expected to see was someone take, the existing ChatGPT technology and just kind of, hey, when someone asks you a question, give diabetes related advice. That would kind of be the most generic thing someone could do, and it wouldn't be great. But when I use Vision, probably one of the main parts is that it's connected to your Night Scout. And Night Scout's already been out there for so long to help collect all of this data about your diabetes. It knows your overrides, it knows your insulin that you're putting in, your basals, your therapy settings, everything. When you ask it questions, first off, it already knows a ton about you, and it's snuck that information in conversations in a bunch of really interesting ways we can talk about in a little bit. But then the other part is that, like you were mentioning, how they want to put your knowledge from all of these podcasts into it. It's really well fine-tuned. I mean, I was kind of expecting to give it a little bit of grace. I'm like, okay, I'll ask it, this really complex scenario that I'm in, like the hairy scenarios of diabetes.
Yeah.
And for it to just give a subpar answer, but it was good.
Yeah.
It was something it's the advanced answer that handles the hairiness of diabetes.
I did the same thing you did when Justin let me try it the first time. I asked it a very convoluted question about my blood sugar. We were actually in somebody's, account. And I was like, okay, what's my blood sugar right now? And it came back and told me, and I said, are you afraid that I'm going to get low? And it said it didn't expect me to get low, but that if I thought I was going to get low, here's how many carbs I should take to stop that. And then I said, okay, what if I want to take this many carbs and eat? And then it said, oh, well, then you'd want to bolus this much. And I was like, man, that's not what I expected either. I was right there with you. I thought for sure this guy was going to show me a sock puppet. You know what I mean? Like something that's just like, I know what diabetes is, and it's this. And I was like, and when it wasn't that, like while you and I were talking earlier, so I'm in Arden's Vision AI account right now. I asked it what my BG was. It said, the most recent update, your glucose level is 159. It is stable. If you have any concerns or notice any changes in how you feel, it's a good idea to keep monitoring your glucose. It does that. I said, I have a low-grade fever and a very sore throat. I'm sorry to hear that you're not feeling well. A low-grade fever and sore throat can be uncomfortable, and it's important to take care of yourself, especially with type 1 diabetes. This illness can affect your blood glucose levels. Okay, so you think that's pretty basic. But then, 1, stay hydrated, and it describes that. It says 2, monitor your blood glucose closely, and it describes that. Adjust your insulin if necessary. Rest, soothe your throat. Consider an over-the-counter remedy. Seek medical advice. Under each one of those bullets gives you a description of what that is in case you don't know. And then I said, well, how much insulin would bring my blood sugar to 99? Then it tells me to calculate how much insulin is needed to bring my blood glucose down to 99. We can use your insulin sensitivity factor, which, by the way, it knows what Arden's insulin sensitivity factor is.
It's in your Night Scout.
And I'm like, holy Hannah. And then it says, based on your data provided of your insulin sensitivity is this right now per unit of insulin, blah, blah, blah. Determine the drop is this. I would use a unit of insulin to bring your blood sugar to 99. And then it, gives you please remember, this is a calculation based on typical responses, blah, blah, blah. For people who don't know what they're doing, my God, this levels you up 3 levels, really.
Yeah.
Just fantastic.
I know. And even, that it mentions the hydration, that cracks me up because that was one advanced suggestion I got from my Harry scenario that I was also impressed by. Because I'm like, that is a basic thing that I feel like, honestly, even if you were talking to a really great endo in person about this very specific situation, they'd probably forget.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody might forget. It's just something you overlook. But to have all of that knowledge in this model, it's not going to forget.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's incredible.
Do you see it being something you would need forever or like forever? And do you use it for other things other than diabetes?
Things other than diabetes. So I think these models are going to be involved in our lives, like how a lot of, websites, the internet, all those things are involved in our lives now. We're talking over Zoom right now.
Mm-hmm.
So specifically, I would see myself using vision forever. I think, your glucose can not always get better, but I feel like there's always variables that pop up, right when I've got it. Oh man, best week of the year. And then, the very next week, oh, the community's picking up, why is everything out of whack? Oh, I'm, instead of putting on muscle right now, I'm trying to lose weight. Oh, it all starts over again. I think it does so much already. Some things I would be really excited to see, the things I had always wanted for years was, I had asked, why can't I track a bunch of events somewhere and have some system kind of keep track of that? Like, okay, I just went on my walk at 9 a.m. I just, it was, 70 degrees outside. I felt a little sick today.
Yeah.
Put those over and over and over again, and then have some system, some app give me suggestions based off of that.
Yeah.
And this is really the first thing that can take the incredible amount of variability from your life and put it all together and come out with a really simple suggestion.
Everything I asked Justin, like, is it possible to get it to do this? Is that he goes, all that is possible. Like I said something like, could we get it to a point? I don't know if it does this now, but could you get it to a point where you could say, hey, last Thursday I ate pizza at, Giuseppe's. I'm going to do it again. How was my bolusing strategy last time? Anything I asked him, he was like, I don't see why I couldn't. And I'm like, geez, it's incredible. Listen, while you were talking, I've been tired and my hair is falling out. What could be wrong with me? Number one, thyroid issues, both hypo and boom, like right like that. That's a common complaint for people with type 1 diabetes. A lot of people have unmanaged thyroids that need help and they don't know, and they spend their life struggling with these problems, right? And because you're not going to think of that. Like, come on, Donald, who's going to go, this is probably my thyroid. After that, boom.
What else could it be?
Yeah. 2 nutritional deficiencies like vitamin D, vitamin B12, and iron. Stress and mental health, other autoimmune diseases could cause these symptoms, especially if you have one autoimmune condition, you might be more susceptible to others. There's a thing that you think people know, but they don't. And it's just hormonal imbalance, medication side effects, given these possibilities, blah, blah, blah. Like, dude, I'm falling short of wondering what I could ask it that I couldn't get a reasonable answer back for. Like, I would like people to know that I don't sign my name onto things like easily. And a lot of people have come and asked me to partner with this podcast over the years, and I just I shoo them all away. And I swear to you, I thought I was getting on a call to shoo Justin away.
Yeah.
I really did. But here we are. So,
and one thing I have to say about that too, is that I had totally thought the same thing, but just him mentioning the quality of people in the community, like you included, obviously, I was just like, oh my gosh, I had thought for years that this product will it's like how I think back to this really funny term that people had used, when insulin was first invented, people were like, aha, diabetes is now cured. We have insulin that, from a cow that we can put into people. That's it. Then they came out with the home glucose meter. Aha, it's cured, So, really all along, it's breakthroughs that just make it a lot more manageable. When I saw that someone is harnessing the awesome power of these LLMs, these AI models, and they're doing it with the high quality folks in the community, I was like, oh my gosh, we're looking at a breakthrough right here. This is the very beginning of the next big diabetes tool.
Yeah, I think so.
It's hard not to want to be a part of it.
I also think that if I've been paying attention and reading between the lines for the last 5 years, every time I interview Dexcom, they mention how valuable data is.
Yes.
Like, it's so valuable that we have everyone's data. Like, one day we'll be able to help you make decisions. And I feel like that's this right here. I think a lot of people might push into this space. I think that's pretty obvious that we're going to see a lot of AI companies come, and some of them will stick and some of them won't as we go along. But this very well might be a situation where being good and first might really be a hell of an advantage. And
I think an important thing is, there's an old saying of, garbage in, garbage out. If you have bad data, you're not going to be able to get good outputs from it, So having all of, your knowledge in there and just all the other good stuff, it's going to be important.
Hey, it filled my heart. I'm going to sound like a dope for a second here, but the reason I've been looking into the AI so much is because I have been having and continue to have this one singular feeling that I put so much effort and time into getting these conversations in one place. But I know the way social media works. And the minute I stop making this podcast, it's just going to disappear. And so, sometimes people ask me, like, why do you put out so much content? I'm like, this is how you keep the podcast alive. Like, everybody, people are putting out like one episode a week or every other. I'm like, yeah, you don't have a podcast, you have a hobby, which is nice. And I'm not saying it's not helping somebody, but the minute they take that candle off that stone, it's going to go stone cold. So I know, keep coming, but I also know the information has to be good. It has to be interesting. You can't give filler. I mean, when you start putting filler content out, you lose people, so all I could think is that one day all this great information is just going to disappear. And I can't let that happen. It's a disservice at this point.
It is. And, it's like, for thousands of years, people have been able to kind of preserve their thoughts through writing, which is great. But, the paper is kind of hard to manage. And, you have to get the piece of paper from one part of the world to the other. You come out with the breakthrough, the internet. You can get that piece of paper from that piece of information you're writing, what's in your head, to someone else in the world right away. Yeah. Now it's like someone else can talk to you, and you might be from 100 years ago. Someone in 100 years might be, talking to Scott about their diabetes.
Yeah, and we can keep building on ourselves instead of starting over all the time. And listen, my example that I'll sound like a crackpot for half a second, but at some point someone knew how to build those pyramids, and I don't see it written down anywhere, and I don't think it was as easy as like sliding rocks together. What happens if, like for whatever reason, like just on a small scale, the podcast I get old and I just stop making it and it goes away, and then you'd be surprised how quickly it'll go back to a bunch of people getting diagnosed. And now there's no like doctor telling them, hey, you should go check out this podcast. Donald's not telling his friends you should check out the podcast. Like, that doesn't happen. And then those people struggle and they start over. And 10 years from now, you hear more and more of the same stories we heard 10 years ago. And I'm not saying that I'm the pinnacle of diabetes knowledge or anything like that. I do think that I have found a way to make it very accessible to a lot of people in a way that makes them want to listen to it.
Totally.
Yeah. And I think that's really maybe one of the things I could be more proud of, because there are times like I'll think to myself, like, this is not like brain surgery, what I'm talking about here, but how come no one else has captured an audience this large before?
I mean, I know that's the incredible part with that information. I mean, I'm sure someone else out there might have a lot of good info written down. But where is it? I'm looking around for it. I'm not just gonna be able to magically find it.
Or you put it in a book, and God bless readers, but most people don't read.
Yeah, totally.
I say all the time, like, you can have like The Secret of Life in a podcast, and if it doesn't sound good, people won't listen to it.
Right.
Forget that they have to pick up a book and actually stay focused and read it, and forget that these people are looking for this information at some of the most dire points in their life, and you're asking them to now read a book about it. Like, it's just, this isn't the time. If I walked up to you, Donald, and I was like, hey, Donald, guess what? And then I smacked you in the head with a shovel a couple of times, then handed you a book about algebra, and I was like, I need to know what X is. You'd be like, what? And I think that's how people feel after they're diagnosed. And even if you've had diabetes for some time, if you've been struggling with it, you still have that like shook feeling all the time. And it's not reasonable to ask somebody to go read a tome and then come back and remember everything and put it into practice. And I mean, if we learn nothing about people, we like storytellers and we like listening to stories, and that's how a lot of us learn. So anyway, I guess it's a long way of me saying I threw in with Justin and this idea of AI because this already seemed like a natural path to me. And I was trying in the background to accomplish it all by myself from this room, and I wasn't getting anywhere. I don't know how to say this so it doesn't sound pompous, so I'll just say it. I've been right a lot over the last decade about how to help people with diabetes. I feel very strongly about this, that this is a good idea.
Completely.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's why you're going to see so many respected people in the community kind of flocking around this and trying to, bring it up, as one of the next great tools in our tool belt.
Yeah. Well, I agree. So what else would you want to tell me about it that I don't know to ask you about it?
Oh man, I had some good use cases come out of it. It's funny. Every time it's like, I love the word, delightful when you're talking about, using something. Cause like, I'll definitely get some like, just delightful. Like it feels good. Like, oh wow, I did not expect this machine to do this. There's kind of the more things you had mentioned, I had, hey, Vision, I just did a spin class and now I'm going to go do a long walk to my favorite bagel shop. How can I not go low from doing my workout, but still manage to not go high from my high carb, delicious bagel? Those are really cool responses. They go through a lot of things you mentioned on the pod. Love that it can call out, it called out my specific overrides because it saw, hey, you have a cardio override. If you're doing spin, that's kind of a cardio exercise. I would use that then, which just, the language tie-togethers on that blew my mind. And while also being extremely helpful. I think the one that you might have not thought of, let me know if you did, but I had it help me review my therapy settings. So like all my different, my IC, my basals, all of that. The most basic example I had for it was, usually I'll chart out my IC and my basal and try to make sure I'm not doing anything too crazy. Like, I want to make sure that if at noon, I'm using more basal, I want to make sure I'm using more IC too. They don't have to be perfectly in sync, but that's kind of generally how I run it. This is such a pain. I've got to go in a Google sheet, got to pull up all these charts for it. So when I was using Vision during my kind of weekly self-appointment with myself, I always have Vision pulled up another tab when I'm doing that. I'm like, hey, look at all my therapy settings, give me a text-based table and just kind of help me understand what my ups and downs from my settings look like. And it did it. I didn't have to go through all of this effort to put that together. So I think having it kind of holistically review your therapy settings is going to be a really big win. And yeah, there's so much more they can add on to it, but that was a fun use case.
That's fantastic. Like, even when I asked it earlier about Arden, like moving her 159, it said that her insulin sensitivity, it knew her insulin sensitivity was 61, but that's not really Arden's insulin sensitivity. And let me explain. Arden's using dynamic ISF on IAPS. So it changes her insulin sensitivity based on what it sees as needs. So my point is that her set insulin sensitivity right now is like 80, but it knew that right now, because it's looking at the settings, that the algorithm has been working off an ISF of 61.
That's awesome.
And the truth is, I wouldn't have thought that. If like you made me think about it right now and said, hey, move Arden's blood sugar, blah, blah, blah. I don't think I wouldn't have thought to look to see what IAPS was calling her insulin sensitivity right now. Like that's a pretty deep layer of complexity. Most people might not even understand what I just said, but it's just very cool that it has access to that information.
Yeah. And it's like, it's so hard to like, I don't know, 10 years ago, I would have never asked, for a website or an app to have the rigor of a computer, where it's always going to consider everything, but then to be flexible enough, like a chat bot or just, a person to be able to, communicate it simply and just kind of understand what I'm asking it. So being able to have both of those, it feels too good to be true.
Yeah.
You use it and you see it's not.
It makes me wonder, as we're talking, which pump company is going to have the foresight to track Justin down and try to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
maybe it'll be all of them at once.
Well, he should lease it to everybody, not just one of them. I would, it's just spectacular. I'm not surprised by it, right? Like, I've been on the side of this. It was hard not to pay attention when they made ChatGPT public, and you could see its limitations and everything. But, you keep hearing over and over again from the people who really understand, wait till you see how much more quickly this is going to double over itself. What else did you see that happened recently that was kind of brilliant? What's the
images?
Oh, wait. Tesla gave their self-driving away for a month to everybody for free. And I thought, they did that to get more data back. Right? Like, they didn't. Yeah, maybe it's a sales pitch, but they also wanted more people to drive with it so that their computers could crunch more scenarios and come up with ways to make the self-driving faster.
A quick data scoop.
Yeah. And I thought, that's really smart, right? And then all I could wonder is, like, how much is it going to improve just from that? Then how much is it going to improve if they, a year from now? Like, and that's what I keep thinking about all this. Like, I don't know if there's a cap to this. I would assume that getting the right answer is the right answer. I don't know how much more better, it's like you can only get so cold. I think you can only do so well, like, getting information from somewhere. But all of a sudden, what if you could make it more human or more relatable? Or I even asked Justin, I thought I asked him an off-the-wall question. I said, is there ever a time where someone could ask the podcast a question and it would respond back in my voice? And he said, that's not out of the question.
You could have it to your face, too.
It's insane. Like, that feels insane to people. But the point is he's got so much of my voice recorded that it could approximate my voice. I was like, that's nuts. Then I started having, like, big questions. Like, do you think my kids will talk to it when I'm dead?
All the existential questions start to drip in.
And would it be me? Anyway, I got past it pretty quickly. But, like, my point is that at some point, these things are going to return back, answers that are so good, they're just kind of perfect. And then it's going to become more about speed and, experience and that kind of stuff. I wonder how it's going to double over itself is all.
Well, and it's like, diabetes is such a big problem. It's, I'm sure there's some things that just the problems aren't crazy hard to solve, like if you take your 6th grade writing assignment, write a 2-page paper on William Shakespeare, it's already gotten to that, right? Not like the biggest problem to have to go through, factor in all of these environmental variables about your life and the diabetes that, like, you might not even be able to, write down, think of in your head. That's a big problem. So I think having something that's going to double over and kind of almost be hard to imagine is, like, just what we need.
The next level becomes people knowing how to prompt it. Like, that's really going to, because could you ask it, for example, like, and I don't know, right? I'd have to ask Justin, but, like, could I say to it, my A1C has been 7.5 for the last 2 years. You see my data. What am I not doing? You know what I mean? Like, where am I seeing excursions and how could they be minimized? That'd be amazing if it just said, hey, look, what if you just started bolusing your meals like 6 minutes earlier? Or, you know what I mean? Like, when you see a rise to this, historically, once we get to here, it feels like we didn't cover the meal well. You probably try putting in more insulin, or like those kinds of ideas that those are not leaps people would make. So it's going to be about, like, asking the right questions. I even wondered, like, could you just say to it at some point, I'd like to brush up on my skills about diabetes. Can you write a 50-question quiz about type 1 diabetes for me that would help me? And
I'm sure it could do it now.
Yeah. That kind of stuff is all, like, it's going to be about the people who teach you how to use the AI.
And that's why I was excited, when ChatGPT came out. I mean, you would think, me being really into tech, I'd be the first person to try it. I had still kind of gave it some time for, like, the hype cycle to go through, because I'm like, is this going to be a big thing? Right in the beginning, it wasn't very good. So, like, I was admittedly even kind of slow at picking up. But once I saw, hey, this is going to be a thing, open up ChatGPT, play around with it. I'm like, oh, hey, this is pretty good. And I had the same feeling about vision, where, we're fortunate. It's already helpful and useful, but I want to practice, asking it the right questions, kind of seeing what the limitations are and the things that it can bump into.
Yeah.
To get those skills up now.
I'm with you. I imagine a time, I don't know where in the future, but I imagine a time that you have an app that is, even from a company that, a retail app that you can ask questions to about your care, about it's a big leap for a company to make. Like a pump company would have to get out of their own way a little bit to be willing to do that. Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's going to be a third party app and, it'll just connect to your data and that keeps the companies out of it. Cause there is, I don't know how much people understand, but the FDA doesn't let a pump company give you treatment advice. That's not actually a thing they're allowed to do. It might always have to be a third party situation, but that you just, as long as you can get your data into it, it can make decisions based on it.
And, it's really cool how, fate has kind of brought us to where we're at, where, Night Scout is a really popular open source tool that lets you put all your data in one place. And then, you have something like Vision that comes along. You don't have to have, months of, the people from Vision trying to muck around and talk to the right companies so that you can pull your data in. It's already right there.
Yeah.
So I just feel like it's so teed up to do what it's doing really well. It's going to work out.
I can't wait to find out where it goes. I really can't. And I again, like I said earlier on, I'm happy to say it again. If Justin becomes a bazillionaire, I will make some money. But, if Justin becomes a thousandaire, am I telling you, I think you should try this? I think it's interesting. And I think you'd be amazed to see it. I can't lie. I think it would be it would be an eye-opening thing for a lot of people. I felt weird about it because, I have a connection to him and I've never really brought somebody on the podcast before to talk about something that directly benefited me before. But in the end, you guys know, you click on the links for the advertisers are happy with me. They buy more ads. It's, probably not dissimilar, but it just still made me feel uncomfortable. So I appreciate you letting me blurt that all out at the beginning. Is there anything I'm not asking you that I should have?
Yeah. I think the last thing that I'd kind of picked up from some conversations with Justin when I onboarded that's helpful for other folks to hear, it's really funny. For a long time, I don't know if other people have this. I'm sure they do, but you kind of get this, these custom little code that you have when you enter in carbs. So for, my food, if, I know if it's a Greek yogurt, I'll just put yolk, or if I had protein shake, I just put, prot shake, some silly things like that. But so whenever I was onboarding with Justin for Vision, we peeked at my Night Scout and he's like, oh, you actually enter in, what you ate. You didn't just have it where there's no icon that you picked or whatever. I'm like, oh yeah, kind of helps me look back and know what it is. And he's like, oh, that, that could be helpful for Vision to know what you're eating. And now I'm thinking oh, holy cow. I had always kind of thought, I'm giving, I'm kind of being the nerd and making sure that all the data is there and, I'm labeling, what I'm entering and things like that. But it's cool to see that there's finally a use case where all of this information that you throw at it can be useful.
Yep.
I think once people try it out, they can see what's helpful to have and what's not. It was just kind of a reminder for me that, yeah, the more information I'm going to put into this and, kind of keep all of my stuff curated, the more it's going to be able to help me out.
I agree. I've had the same thought. You're making all these keystrokes and we're not getting anything out of it. I mean, the algorithm just knows slower digestion.
Totally.
You know what I mean? It's just not exciting enough. I had somebody come on once and talk about IAPS, and we went over that idea of, you used the pizza place as an example, but, pizza place A and pizza place B hit your blood sugar differently. Why couldn't your algorithm know when you're at pizza place A and when you're at pizza place B?
Yeah. And, that's
you know what I mean? You know what I
all
mean?
these little, I think everybody probably has this wish list of things someone could do this. Why aren't they doing it? That's the really cool thing about these large language AI models is that you can just ask it and see how close it can get to it. If I'm typing in, I'm going to my favorite pizza shop, look back at my times I've written in pizza shop A versus pizza shop B, and am I going high versus one of the others, or something different I can do? Am I usually entering like too few carbs for that meal? It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, no, I can't wait. I honestly can't wait to see what happens. So, all right. Well, Donald, I can't thank you enough for doing this. I didn't really ask you to tell people, but can you give people a tiny bit of background about what you do? You don't have to say where you do it, but what do you do for a living?
Yeah. So I guess as we kind of hinted at, I'm a software engineer, left technology. I'm currently working at Amazon. And before that, I was at Salesforce. Also work on a couple things on the side, hopefully get it to...
Got to get away from your overlords at Amazon?
Hey, you said it, not me.
That's amazing. What did you do in college? Like, how did you get to this? What did you major in?
Computer science.
Yeah.
So pretty typical path from that part.
You just took to it, or was it always something like, how do you know? 10 years ago, did you even know what it was you were going to be doing one day when you were studying it? Or is today so much different than what you imagined? I guess is my question.
I don't think I expected getting into, entrepreneurship and starting my own thing. But I was definitely always, when I was just starting off in high school, that I got into it and, just did it for a little bit. I was like, oh my gosh, this is really fun. I can make things, it was a little different than something like, I done some wood shop, and that was fun because, I like building things, but I'm like, oh, I got to have all the right materials. I got to have a shop. But then whenever I was doing software, like, well, I pretty much always have a computer available to me, and I can just, type on the keyboard and make something in front of me and share it with everybody. Mm-hmm. That's definitely what pulled me into it.
Amazing. That's really something. All right. Well, I appreciate you doing this very much. I know it's the evening and you probably had a long day already. Can I ask you after we stop, can I ask you to hold for 1 second? I want to ask you another question.
Yeah, for sure.
Off the recording though. Okay, great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And I have to call out here too that, if people want to check out Vision, it's at ihavevision.com at the solid price of $19.99 a month, which, I think you're just getting a huge bang for your buck for all the stuff you're getting able to do with it. So
Donald's like, you're not much of a salesman, Scott. You didn't mention the website.
You got to give it a shout out.
ihavevision.com.
ihavevision.com.
Okay.
Yep.
I appreciate it. All right. Hold on 1 second for me. I want to thank the Eversense CGM for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Learn more about its implantable sensor, smart transmitter, and terrific mobile application at eversensecgm.com/juicebox. Get the only implantable sensor for long-term wear. Get Eversense. Mark is an incredible example of what so many experience living with diabetes. You show up for yourself and others every day, never letting diabetes define you. And that is what the Medtronic Champion community is all about. Each of us is strong, and together we're even stronger. To hear more stories from the Medtronic Champion community or to share your own story, visit medtronicdiabetes.com/juicebox. I'd love to see you in Orlando for the Touched by Type 1 event. Go to touchedbytype1.org and get yourself some tickets. They're absolutely free. The event's coming up soon. Don't wait. It's filling up, and I'm not just saying that. Hey everyone, it's me. I just want to be clear again that if you should go to ihavevision.com and subscribe, I will get a piece of that money. And if the company should go public one day or be sold and make any kind of income from that, I get the tiniest little 0.25% of the value at the end. So I just want to be completely clear about that. There's no pressure from me for you to go to ihavevision.com. Please don't feel like that. But if you do, I appreciate it. I'm sure that Justin appreciates you helping him getting his business off the ground. No pressure from me, but I do benefit if you spend money at that website. And I want to be 1,000,000% clear about that. Thank you. If you or a loved one was just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and you're looking for some fresh perspective, the Bold Beginnings series from the Juicebox Podcast is a terrific place to start. That series is with myself and Jenny Smith. Jenny is a CDCES, a registered dietitian, and a type 1 for over 35 years. And in the Bold Beginnings series, Jenny and I are going to answer the questions that most people have after a type 1 diabetes diagnosis. The series begins at episode 698 in your podcast player, or you can go to juiceboxpodcast.com and click on Bold Beginnings in the menu. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. The episode you just heard was professionally edited by Wrong Way Recording. WrongWayRecording.com.